Today was an important day in the United States Senate. There was a vote, not on a substantive bill, but rather whether there should be debate permitted on those proposals coming before the Senate relating to guns. The vote was 68 to 31, and I want you to know the yes votes and the no votes because how the parties voted is critical. 16 Republicans joined 52 Democrats in voting yes, let's have the debate. 2 Democrats joined 29 Republicans in voting no, saying, let's not have the debate. In the end, this was a vote having to do with whether or not there could even be a discussion. I think the pressure which came from the parents of Sandy Hook children, the pressure which came from key forces in the White House, including the President of the United States, and the forces most important of all of public opinion, compelled the Republicans to cave in their attempt to prevent a discussion on this vital matter. But the issue is not yet resolved. A bill will come before the Senate, an actual proposal, and it will then be debated and discussed and ultimately voted on. But remember that amendments can be submitted, that stalling tactics can be employed, that a whole series of parliamentary maneuvers can be used in order to ensure that this bill, whatever its content may be, does not really have a chance of passing. And let's assume for a moment that the bill passes in the United States Senate, because the Democrats do control the Senate, and there may be some Republican defections, as there were on the question of taking it to a vote. But here's the issue. Here's the issue. What happens when it gets to the House? John Boehner most assuredly will oppose this bill. The overwhelming majority of Republicans who control the House of Representatives will oppose this bill. So the question becomes, what happens then? Well, even if something does pass, and it will be minimal, whatever it is, the reality is that those who advocate for major legislation dealing with guns do not have the votes to pass anything in the House or in the Senate. I don't know whether legislation will solve the problem. I do know this. Yesterday, when I was hosting a talk show, I had a most interesting experience. I got a caller who said that I clearly was against the Second Amendment. I interrupted the caller and very politely said to him, "Of course I support the Second Amendment. You have the right to bear arms." He answered me by calling me a fascist and saying, no, you want to take guns away from people. My answer was, look, the Supreme Court of the United States has upheld the principle of individual gun ownership. The Second Amendment is inviolate, but there are methods, there are ways of imposing certain restrictions even in the most open circumstance. And let me give you an example, I said. Take an automobile. In order to drive a car, you have to have a license. The car has to be registered. You have to have insurance. You have the right to drive a car if you are able to pass all of the requirements, including that driving test. With guns, should there not be some requirement that works in terms of keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them? Oh, it's true. There'll always be these kinds of tragedies. There are more guns than people in the United States of America. But stop and think of the consequences of doing nothing. Every day, when you turn on the television or the radio, you open a newspaper, or you go to a blog, you read about more and more, you hear about more and more gun violence on every level of our society. It is a scary thought that you could simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time, as happens with countless Americans. Now, the argument is made, more people die in traffic accidents. Why not ban cars? Well, you and I know there is no equation between guns and cars. It's apples and oranges. But there is a question that must be confronted. There are issues that must be debated. And yes, the Congress of the United States will have to take votes. But hold on. Ultimately, all of these questions will end up before the United States Supreme Court. The constitutionality of legislation will certainly find its way to the Supreme Court, particularly in the question of guns, because of the question of how you interpret the Second Amendment. And so, while all of this goes on, while the Senate now agrees that they will consider legislation, that there will be up and down votes, there's a long way to go before something really happens. The battle lines are drawn, and we are going to watch with intense interest not only what happens in the Senate and in the House, but what happens in the midterm elections of 2014. I always remember that in 1994, after Dianne Feinstein introduced her legislation, which banned certain types of automatic weapons, that in that midterm election, Democrats who voted for Feinstein's legislation were targeted and defeated, and the Republicans took over the House and the Senate. Every politician has one thing in mind: how do I get reelected? So my suggestion is this is going to be a long battle with a lot of consequences, a lot of legal twists and turns, a lot of legislative twists and turns, and yes, a lot of public opinion twisting and turning, because no one really knows what the right answer is. We're going to see this debate unfold. I am looking forward to it, and we'll be talking about it right here. I am John Rothmann, delighted to be with you, right here as we do this podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.